In 2021, the Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, enacted a regulation that required millions of healthcare workers to be vaccinated against COVID-19, a highly contagious, potentially fatal disease. In the combined cases of Biden versus Missouri and Becerra versus Louisiana, the United States Supreme Court examined whether the agency had statutory authority to enact that regulation. HHS, a federal agency, administered the insurance programs Medicare and Medicaid. By statute, HHS was generally authorized to enact regulations necessary for the efficient administration of the Medicare and Medicaid programs. Other statutory sections specifically allowed the agency to impose program-related health and safety regulations on some entities. For example, by statute, a hospital could receive Medicare and Medicaid funds only if it met whatever requirements the agency determined were necessary for patient health and safety. Historically, HHS had used this authority to place numerous conditions on facilities that cared for Medicare and Medicaid patients, including safety conditions like infection control programs. In addition, states had typically required that healthcare workers be vaccinated against certain infectious diseases, like the measles. In 2021, data gathered by HHS indicated that 35 to 40% of healthcare workers hadn't been vaccinated against COVID-19. Patients were more likely to catch COVID-19 from unvaccinated healthcare workers than vaccinated healthcare workers. Medicare and Medicaid patients were members of physically vulnerable groups who faced significant danger from COVID-19 infections. Patients were avoiding medical treatments out of fear of contracting COVID-19 at medical facilities. And worker shortages from healthcare workers who'd contracted COVID-19 were disrupting patient care. That fall, expressing concern about the onset of flu season and a particularly contagious COVID variant, the Secretary of HHS, Javier Becerra, bypassed the normal notice and comment procedures and enacted an emergency interim rule. Under the interim rule, a facility could receive Medicare or Medicaid funding only if all employees who didn't qualify for a medical or religious exemption were vaccinated against COVID-19. Two groups of states, one led by Missouri and the other by Louisiana, challenged the rule's validity. Both district courts entered a preliminary injunction preventing the interim rule from being enforced while the cases were pending. The Fifth and Eighth Circuits affirmed the preliminary injunctions. The federal government asked the United States Supreme Court to stay the injunctions.